This is Tim.
And Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Kichijoji, Tokyo, in a rental room again. Same place as a few weeks ago. How are you doing?
I'm all right.
We just had some takeout food, some kind of deli food, I guess you could say.
Yeah, deli food.
Some burritos and stuff.
Yeah, it's a place called Carnival in Kichijoji. It's kind of like a import shop for food items and tea and alcohol and chocolate. And they've got a deli section which is pretty cheap and pretty good, so I recommend it if anybody wants to come check it out.
Yeah, I saw a lot of junk food from around the world there.
World junk.
Including Doritos. So, anyway. So this time, since we're together, it's a good chance to review paper comics. And at Comic Art Tokyo back in November, I picked up the second anthology from Tokyo Collective, which was started by Erica Ward and Julia Nascimento, if I'm pronouncing it right. I never get it right. So this is called Monogatari, which is story in Japanese, and it's about inanimate objects in Tokyo is the theme. So each creator chose an object in Tokyo, some very small, like a key or a pair of rubber boots, to an entire well-known building, or a train station platform, really a variety of types of things in Tokyo. And then Erica at the end, in her style, her style is, all of her art is about Tokyo, really. It will be like a combination of things, recognizable aspects of Tokyo, and so she wraps it up with a comic that's similar to her, her one-picture illustrations of that same nature. Kind of ties up, various, that it's the sum of its parts. So we've looked at parts, and now Tokyo is the sum of its parts. Anthologies are always kind of tricky. What was your favorite one in here?
The one about the platform.
Yeah, that was mine too. Yeah, that's Felipe called Bernardes, Julia's husband.
Yeah, it's in Japanese, but it's pretty much self-explanatory. The Japanese is just kind of the announcements you would hear at the station.
Yeah.
But basically, it shows a day in the life of the station, and all of the things that are depicted there I have seen directly, including the probable suicide and the multiple people throwing up and pissing themselves from drinking too much.
Both early in the morning on the first page and late at night on the last page.
Yeah, I was almost one of those guys in the early morning. I took the first train home after spending the night in the park somewhere in Tokyo. Thank God it was summer. But it was such a rough day. And I almost blurted on the first train in. But it's well drawn. It's very descriptive. You don't really need to read the text to understand what's going on. And it was so true to life without actually kind of turning the object into a character, which a lot of the other writers did do. And sometimes I agreed with that style and sometimes I didn't. But This one just shows it as it is, and that was more than enough.
Yeah. What else do we got? The opening one, it's about a key that's like hanging on a little post in Shibuya. You see just kind of a far shot of it in one of the panels, but it's kind of the thoughts of that key. It's personified.
Yeah, I didn't like that personified bit. I thought the idea of a key that wanted to be a rapper was it didn't quite jive for me. But I can understand the idea of the key itself, but the rap part kind of lost me.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes it about something other than an object in Tokyo.
Yeah. And so there's a certain... I was kind of confused as to who the audience is, because it's sometimes in English and sometimes in Japanese. And to really understand this comic, you have to be bilingual.
Yes.
And so there's... the reader's always going to be at a disadvantage unless he or she is bilingual.
Right, and some of them had English, but I still didn't quite understand it.
Well, the thing is, if you've lived in Tokyo for a long time, these things are so familiar, you might as well just, take these two objects and do a comedy routine with them, because there's nothing else to really say about it. Mm-hmm. And that's where the platform one works so well, is that it doesn't really say anything as much as it shows it. Mm-hmm. And what's the old adage? Show don't tell. Mm-hmm. So that's why it works so well to me. The other ones tell but don't really show.
Right. Yeah. The Shibuya one, a lot of the pictures don't really have anything to do with the key. They're just scenes from Shibuya, which are done by Julia. The writer is Craig Atkinson. But yeah, I mean, it could just be a story about something else in Shibuya. You do see the key, like I said, in a far shot on the third page, but there's no close-up of the key or anything. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know, just kind of aside from the key wants to be a rapper part of it, also just the words and the pictures don't fit together as well as they could.
Yeah, I can understand where you want to show pictures of Tokyo and you want to kind of set a mood or a style for it, but really there's no reason why the words and the pictures have to be together. There's nothing that kind of locks it together into one cohesive piece, and it could have been just the pictures. Or it could have been just the words. Yeah. And we would have taken the same thing from the story itself. Mm-hmm. They don't add to each other, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right, yes. Yeah, well, in fact, since that key is there, just kind of a detail of the picture, it almost makes me wonder if Julia did the pictures first and then Craig said, I'll write about the key that's on the third page. It might have been a decision that was made after the pictures were drawn.
Isn't that the way Marvel used to make comics?
Not exactly, but close to that. I think there was some discussion of the basic outline of the story, and then the artist would draw all the pages, and then Stan Lee or somebody would come in and write the dialogue. Yeah. But I'm thinking this might be even one step removed from that, where there was no communication. The artist did the art, and then somebody else came in and said, I know, I'll put a story with this about the key on the third page.
But see, that right there, that's not a comic as much as an Exquisite Corpse project. Mm-hmm. Exquisite Corpse, the participants don't know what the other participants are doing until the end of it. Yeah. I mean, an anthology, by its very nature, is that kind of thing, based on a theme. But in the same story, on the same page, is a little difficult to pull off really well. Mm-hmm. There has to be a tighter theme if you're going to do that, and there's no grounding moment in that story that will pull you in or set everything right at the end. So yeah, it has some problems, but I still love the artwork. Julia's artwork is always amazing, and so for me that kind of works, and everything is the Tokyo that I love to loathe. But come on, Shibuya is for 15-year-olds and 25-year-olds who want to be 15. But it's not for adults, and I haven't really gone out there since the invention of the internet.
Wow.
Or at least digital downloading, because it used to be full of record shops, and I'd go down there and just tour the record shops for 2 or 3 hours, and then go home. And if I escaped Shibuya with money in my pocket, I was lucky, because I could always find a record with my name on it.
A few of the ones that are in Japanese, I mean, not only do you need to be, to be able to read Japanese, but you need to be able to deal with the handwritten Japanese. I really don't like comics that are in handwritten Japanese, because it's really work to read it.
Yeah. Some of the content was a little bit abstract for me, and I was kind of like, okay, what is this? No, I'm not down.
Yeah, there's this one that's like the girl. Tokyo Tower is a girl, and Tokyo Skytree, the newer, taller tower, is a boy, and these like 4-panel, a group of like 8 4-panel comics about them.
Yeah, the 4-panel comics were a little too abstract for me. I didn't quite get it a lot of the time. And so, I mean, perhaps if I were more fluent in Japanese, or I was a little bit immersed in pop culture here, because I don't watch TV, and most of the people I talk to are international people, so they're not so set on what the essence of Tokyo and Tokyo culture is, in a broader sense. And so a lot of this stuff was just slipped by me, and I didn't quite get it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it seems like it's something where everyone will find things they really like, things that are meh, and things that they just don't understand, regardless of which language you started with.
That's true. It's kind of a mixed bag. But I mean, I think that is one of the benefits of doing an anthology, is that there's always that one little bit of gold in there that some artist did. And if you find that bit of gold in this, then follow that artist, because more often than not, you've got other work that you're going to like. And for me, in the comic that was gold for me in this, Philip's comic, his other works are quite good and along the same line. Not quite as observational as that. They're stories rather than a similar kind of day in the life thing. But if you like the art style, if you like some of the gags that are held within that comic, then his other work you'll like very much. I know, because I've read it, and I've actually reviewed it here as well. So, and some of the other artists, I've read their work too, and I like their work. Even for a couple of them that I'm not so keen on in this anthology, their other works are a little bit better.
I should say the personified Tokyo Tower and Skytree, those comics are by Kaori Noda. There's a story by Lori Ono called Life Cycle about this teapot. And a couple using it. They seem to be Caucasian. The appearance, or at least she is. She seems to have blonde hair. That guy could be Japanese. It's cartoony enough that it's a little hard to tell. But they're using this teapot, and it gets broken, and they glue it back together, and it gets broken again. And then by that point, it's like it's too broken to repair. So they put it out for the garbage. But then the woman is, kind of has so much sentimental value that she starts crying and she's running after the garbage truck to get it back. And I could certainly appreciate that idea that we get sentimental about certain objects.
Yeah.
I thought the story was fine. The only thing that bugged me about it was it's weird how every time the teapot falls on the floor or breaks, it's empty. There's never any liquid coming out of it.
Well, that's yeah, I suppose, but I think the overall concept though is quite universal. Sentimentality is actually a good thing, and in fact, that is the story of my bicycle, which I had to part ways with in December. So, yeah.
The one about Tokyo Skytree. Let's see, this is Chizuko Tanaka. This one, the whole thing is in both languages.
About Sunshine...
Or, sorry, Sunshine 60.
Yeah.
That. Sunshine 60, yes. Yeah, well, I mean, having both languages there is nice, although it makes it kind of crowded.
It was kind of crowded, but the artwork also kind of lends itself to that kind of style, kind of lots of detail and emotion crammed into every panel. And I didn't mind the art style or the crowdedness so much. It does have kind of an indie comics feel to it. If you look at some of the indie stuff from the 70s in America, it has somewhat of a similar feel.
Sunshine 60 is a building in Ikebukuro area of Tokyo, 60 meaning 60 floors. She explained on the first page, well, the building is personified, so the building explains to us that it was built in 1978, or born, as it says. And at the time it was the tallest building in Asia, and it was built, well, she uses a footnote to explain this, because the building itself doesn't know this. Well, it just says, the older folks say that before I was born there was a, quote, prison, unquote, here, but I don't really know what that means. And the footnote says, Sugamo Prison. After World War II, it was used as a detention facility for the war criminals by GHQ. The death penalty of 7 people, including A-class war criminal Tojo Hideki, was executed there. So I feel like I kind of heard that before, or like, I think my ex-wife was a little nervous about that place because of her Buddhist beliefs, and people were killed there, and so she was nervous about that
people
place.
are killed everywhere.
Yeah,
because people kill people.
Yeah, and I imagine that they probably called it Sunshine to kind of change the tone of the area, try to make people forget what used to be there. I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose there is a little bit of Windex shine there, but
the place has like shopping centers, and there's a sea aquarium on the top of it.
It feels kind of 80s, like it never really progressed beyond the bubble era. Even though they've got like now Starbucks and some other modern things, it's the architecture. It hasn't been. The interior has not been updated since then. Even though most of the stations around Tokyo have updated themselves in the past 10 years, this place isn't really a station building, but is kind of, yeah.
Well, that tends to happen in Japan. Like Tokyo Tower, well, I haven't been in Tokyo Tower in a long time, but when I was there in 2001, you get to the observation deck and, oh, it's the 60s. And at that time anyway, they had not updated the labels for what you're seeing out the window, and so all these newer buildings in some cases were blocking your view of the things that were on the labels.
That's pretty poor, because
out the one side you could see the Rainbow Bridge, but there was no label about it because it wasn't built in the early 60s when Tokyo Tower was built.
They should have fixed that shit.
I mean, that's been now 18 years ago. I hope it's improved since then, but I haven't been there to look.
Yeah, I actually went to the base of Tokyo Tower and was uninspired to climb or to go up. So I've never been inside of it. yeah, it's like, okay, here it is. And no.
That reminds me of, boy, I don't know what went through our minds that time in 2001. So we were there with our then 3 relatively small kids, and there was such a long line for the elevator that we walked up.
Up Tokyo Tower.
Up Tokyo Tower to the lower observation deck.
I'm so sorry for your kids.
Anyway, anything else we should note about stories in here?
Is this comic book available online?
I was trying to figure that out. I didn't track anything down. There is a Gmail address, tocotokyo@gmail.com.
Hit them up and ask them for a book.
I'm not seeing a URL here anywhere.
Well, look, the artists that I do know from this book all have personal websites where they sell their own books. So the idea that they don't know how to get you a copy of this book seems a little bit odd to me. So if this wasn't a limited print run, like very limited, then there should be some copies left. And
you're filling up somebody's basement or something that they'd like to get rid of.
Yeah. I think a lot of comic artists are in that situation when they're independent.
Yeah, I'm listening to Dave Kellett and Brad Geiger on Comic Lab. They've got closets full of print runs that were larger than they need to be.
Yeah, no, my girlfriend now at this point is like, you've got closets full of like comics that you will never sell. Get rid of that shit, burn it something. I don't know. It's like, what? I did spend money on that.
I've
try and sell it.
I've still got a fair number of my English study book too. I did sell a lot of them, but and occasionally I sell another one, but I haven't really made the effort to sell them recently.
Yeah, actually, I've been really bad about that myself. There are books that I've printed that I've not yet put for sale on my website.
Oops.
Not quite oops. I mean, one of them is actually 2 years late getting it on my website. And if people ask me about it on my email, I was like, yeah, I've got it here. And it'll cost you $5 or $10 or whatever, and I'll send it out. But, aside from that, I think I just kind of walked away from my website for 2 years while I kind of dealt with my work situation. But now that that's kind of dealt with, I'm thinking of kind of revamping everything and putting up all the comics that have been kind of waiting in the background.
Support the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts at patreon.com/deconcomics. Give at least $4 a month and you'll have access to our bi-weekly podcast miniseries, Spider-Man 1963. The cast of Deconstructing Comics and To the Bat Poles do an issue-by-issue deep dive into the first year of The Amazing Spider-Man. Here's a sample of what patrons are listening to.
Let's talk a little bit, so I like going into some nitpicky things on these issues. Let's talk about the Spider Sense.
Oh my god, you know what? You are reading my mind.
Awesome.
And I actually have a note here, which is Spider Sense is almost telepathic. And what I wanted to say about that is, with these early issues, you have the idea of Spider-Man taking shape still. Like, there's all these elements that are being introduced for the first time, and then they seem so wild now because it's kind of like Superman, in that when Superman was first introduced, he could do anything.
Yeah.
And then over the years, writers and artists started toning down his power set because it became harder to tell stories with him if he could do absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But Spider-Man in this issue with the Vulture, he literally he's sitting on a building just waiting for his radar sense to go off.
Well, yes.
For much more discussion of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's Amazing Spider-Man, go to patreon.com/deconcomics and support us for at least $4 a month. We thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
So recently, Malele and I have been looking at, there are a couple of articles posted on Cosmic Book News. I guess it's cosmicbook.news, written by Matt McGloin, not the former NFL quarterback Matt McGloin, different Matt McGloin.
Who?
There was a quarterback in the NFL just recently named Matt McGloin, and when I saw this comics writer's name, I was like, what?
Sorry, man, I don't watch basketball.
Football.
Whatever.
Anyway, so yeah, Matt McGloin, I guess he started this site better part of 10 years ago now. I was looking at the About section. But he's been writing about both Marvel and DC having difficulties in the current market. Well, and part of it is that Marvel has been flooding the market lately with, bi-weekly comics and sometimes weekly comics, of a certain title. And, well, his article... So DC is talking about cutting back on how many comics they put out. So it says January they shipped 87 comics, where Marvel put out 102. And that's... I don't know what they think they're doing. I imagine they're intending to keep people from buying any other comics, only Marvel comics, but it's just becoming so diluted that it's hurting comic shops. And his other article was that it was sort of speculation, but there was some hint that Disney could consider just shutting Marvel down. And a point that I missed the first time I read it was that the comics wouldn't necessarily go away, but they might license them out. Mm-hmm. So, like, IDW might make Spider-Man comics, for example, rather than Disney bothering to have a subsidiary that did it themselves because it's not profitable.
That actually might be a better idea. I think for IDW doing Spider-Man, it's not a legacy character for them, so their pride isn't riding on that. It's kind of a fun little toy that they're able to make a little bit of money off of and maybe do some interesting things with. It depends on how heavy the mandates are from the parent company or from the license holder. But I can see someone else doing something more interesting with that in a smaller capacity rather than trying to dominate the entire market with each and every title that they're putting out.
Yeah, and stop doing all those stupid events. I mean, events were nice when they were once a year, but now it's just gotten ridiculous.
The first and last event that I ever took part in was the Secret Wars.
Yeah.
The original Secret Wars.
Yeah, I remember it.
In the 80s. Yeah.
I hated it, but...
We talked about it on previous podcasts, I think, but you hated it. Why is that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Paul and I both thought the story was stupid and the art was bad.
I thought the art was a bit rushed, and yeah, it wasn't the best art. But I think for them it was a big experiment. And they left all of their regular artists on their regular books. They didn't pull anybody from there. They didn't hire John Byrne to do the Secret Wars. Maybe he said no, because at the time he was a top-notch artist.
Yeah, he was doing Fantastic Four then, and something else.
Bill Sienkiewicz was an up-and-comer who was just killing it on New Mutants at the time. But they probably had to beg, steal, and borrow to get that shit done, and then ask people to make a couple of changes to coincide with the story. And it became a hit, and I think that's where they really started to push forward into this idea of there has to be a yearly event. Then it seemed to be every 2 months there was an event. Now it's all tied into one big thing. And they're doing the same thing with the movies, where you have 20 movies that are all tied together to run up to this one movie that they've now split into two parts, where not just... It was originally, okay, here are these four movies, and they all come together to make this Avengers movie. And then, okay, now we've got this thing called Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, where we're just taking every couple of years of movies and then pulling them together into one big chapter. And then the final end of all of this, the culmination of all of this, comes with this Avengers Infinity War movie. And, well, it kind of started to go the same way with the comics. And at a certain point, that's not sustainable. Because if I'm paying $20 for a movie, if I watch it in the theater, once every 3 or 4 months, then I'm kind of okay. But if I'm spending $5 per comic and they're releasing 80 titles a month, I'm kind of not okay. And I can't pick and choose enough to follow the entire story and live my life. So it was unsustainable by any stretch of the imagination anyway. But their vision is so narrowly focused on their immediate future that they would try and soak everybody for it. And when they couldn't soak the customer anymore, they soaked the comic shops. And one thing we should point out, just a couple of things, going back a little bit. I originally heard about this on a YouTube channel called Nerdrotic. And you can find him at nerdrotic.com or Nerdrotic, the YouTube channel. And I don't agree with everything he says, but he's the guy who runs that, or is a former comic book shop owner in San Francisco. Is looking at the comic book scene, and he was like, "Okay, this is ending." And he pointed to this article titled "Disney Shutting Down Marvel Comics?" ? And it kind of runs through it. And then the article that you just talked about, written by the same article author, Matt McGloin. In that he says the magic number of comic book shops is 1,500. Below that, the entire market implodes. And how many stores are we at now?
I was just scrolling trying to find that.
Yeah, but we're somewhere around 2,000 shops, below 2,000 shops. But the idea is that from 2016 to 2019, we've dropped about 50% of the stores that we've had.
So here he's quoting Brian Hibbs in San Francisco. He has a comic shop there, Comics Experience. National sales are very poor. There are comics in the national top 100 that aren't even selling 20,000 copies. A significant number of stores have closed, perhaps as many as 10% of outlets, Hibbs said. Want a clear and current example of Marvel's preposterous flood the zone strategy? War of the Realms is supposed to be their major Q2 project in 2019, but in the first month alone they're asking us to buy into 2 issues of the series being released with no sales data, as well as 4 different tie-in miniseries. All 6 of these comics, which are built around the 6-issue storyline, will require final orders from us before we sold a single comic to an actual reader. Let's see, I was trying to find the number of outlets. I cannot find it. Anyway, but yeah, it's shrinking.
Yeah, so basically, in the Disney Shutting Down Marvel Comics ? Article, it does talk about Joe Quesada and editor-in-chief C.B. Cebulski are going to South by Southwest this year to give a panel discussion on why comics are worth it. And basically, it sounds like they're fighting for their jobs. And mind you, these 2 people may not be directly responsible for some of the worst of what Marvel's done in the past couple of years. That one with Captain America and and Hydra was pretty fucking awful. From the storyline to the actual concept of the whole thing to the marketing, which was really poorly thought out. They weren't directly responsible for this, but they've had a hand in kind of getting us there. And Joe Quesada, I'm not so familiar with his career, but C.B. Cebulski, the day he entered as editor-in-chief, he had that big scandal break where he was basically writing as a Japanese person. He had an alias as a Japanese person, and he was living in Japan and experiencing Japanese culture and then writing these scripts about Japanese culture for Marvel. And Marvel basically ate it up, gave him a lot of time, And basically people are looking at that and saying, well, what about actual Japanese writers? Why don't you work with them? And they were trying to kind of palm it off as it's all good. But basically what this does for me is it makes me feel like these two characters, or at least Cebulski, is not above that kind of shit. And so his ability to play things straight or do something for people, I don't see it as being there. I don't see him doing anything for anybody except himself, because the act of what he did as a writer was so selfish and kind of disrespectful.
I found what I was looking for. It's actually in the DC article, quoting from Ethan Van Sciver. So he says, in 2016, there were 2,306 comic book stores. Now there are 1,900. So that's over 400 closed in the past 3 years.
Yeah.
Comic book stores are closing down and going out of business at a startling and frightening rate. Once we reach the critical mass of 1,500 retailers, for companies like DC and Marvel to solicit their product to, it will no longer be viable. All during this collapse, DC and Marvel have employed price hikes. They have employed various gimmick scams. I mean, I call them scams. That is what I think they are. A retailer's job is to look at the product that they are being offered and then kind of decide based on what they knew about their customer base, the people who come into their store and what they buy, how many copies of each one of these comic books that they should provide on their stands for complete sell-through. Nobody wants to be stuck with this product. 2 weeks after its date, it has gone cold. At this point, comics are like bread. They have a sell-by date, and they go stale, and people do not buy them when they go stale. That is the situation with comics now. Yeah, so at that rate, then in another year or so, we could get down to 1,500, maybe even less than, maybe it would be more like another 2 or 3 years, but...
Yeah, it may be another 2 or 3 years, but I don't think Disney's going to wait for that. Because the other side of this is that Marvel Comics is not making money despite all their shitty tactics. Not the money that Disney wants them to make anyway. From what I'm understanding, they're kind of red inking it now. So
yeah, I think it said one of the articles said, I'll link to these articles, but I think it said that they were the only Disney subsidiary that was losing money.
And if that's the case, Disney would not look at it like something that they really needed. They don't need the characters to be out there in paper form when they're making movies, which are guaranteed sellers. Even the lowest of the Marvel movies still turns a profit and has a role to play in a much larger fabric of movies. So there's replay value and all of this stuff as well, even for like Ant-Man and the Wasp, which I thought was kind of dumb. It wasn't even unexpected like the first one, but the first one had Edgar Wright involved in it. This second one was just poor comparatively, but still, what does it mean for, or what do you think it means for comics, just like a post-Marvel and post-DC, for that matter, comics market?
Yeah, I mean, even if, as you were saying, even if they did shut down Marvel and license out some characters, they wouldn't be putting out 100 books a month.
No.
So there would be less product. I mean, it could end up helping comic stores if they're not being flooded with product and not diluting the choices so much. It might end up helping. Or, it could free up some of the kind of second-tier companies to step up and put out more product, which could be good or bad depending on what the product is.
Yeah. Actually, quick question. Marvel and DC, did they put out anything other than superheroes?
Well, I'm not familiar with everything they're putting out. There has been like a Western series here and there. Or, I couldn't for sure say that it's all superheroes, but obviously that's the majority of it.
Okay. Because I mean, my opinion about superheroes is pretty clearly stated through this podcast.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, I'll give you the abridged version.
In comics, but then in movies, it's a little different.
Well, but specifically, it's not the superhero as much as it is the form that it's come to be. A never-ending series of stories that are bland to nonsense about people who wear their underwear on the outside does not excite me. Mm-hmm. I want to see a little bit shorter, tighter graphic novel at best contains stories about people who wear their underwear on the outside.
So it's not the genre; it's the kind of form that it takes.
Yeah. Because this endless shit of 20 to 30 pages a month is just not worth it. Especially the thing where I finally kind of gave up on superhero comics was there was an arc in the X-Men where I think it was Storm who lost her powers, and it took her a couple of years to get it back. And by the time she got them back, I was already done because it just kept ebbing and flowing forever, and it was just there was no jump off point. Mm-hmm. And there was no real jump-on point either.
Yeah, that's another point that we haven't gotten to yet, where I think the way Marvel and DC have been going for so long, can be pretty hard to break into these stories if you don't know all the background.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily want to know all the background either. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just want to sit down and watch a movie.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, my point is then people just don't break in. They and it's hard to find the comics in the first place because they aren't really. The graphic novels might be in bookstores, but the floppies are not. So if they don't have a comic shop nearby, I guess they don't even have them in supermarkets anymore. When I was growing up, back in my day, you could just go into the local supermarket and there'd be some bent up comics in a rack.
Yeah. No, I remember that, like back in the 70s. But no, I would say that for myself, the last time I enjoyed superhero comics was America's Best Comics by Alan Moore. Mm-hmm. And I loved reading Tom Strong and I forget who else was in that. Johnny something. But anyway, I enjoyed that, and that was kind of an anthology comic. So in 20 pages, I'd get 2 or 4 stories. They were really short, but they were kind of interesting. The art was amazing every time. And that's the best of comics, in my mind. I can read a continuing series like that, where every week I'm going to get 2 to 4 comics of different characters, different stories, and I can follow them like a serial. I don't have to invest too much more than that. But if I have to buy 87 comics a month at $5 a pop, when they're beginning to expand the story arcs where the content in each issue is getting less and less, I don't want a double-page spread every 3 pages with 2 words, like, get him, and 100 scroll running after some guy.
It's not that decompressed anymore. But then, the other thing is that there have been cuts in the number of pages.
Oh, really? So they're like 16 pages now?
It's not that bad, but I think DC is maybe like 20, where it used to be 24.
Okay, well, look, as someone who's actually from his own pocket published books, adding those 2 extra pages isn't going to kill them. It might help them in the long run if they actually tell good stories with those 2 extra pages. But there's a line of quality and quantity that you just can't cross. And once you do that, you're kind of in a crapshoot situation. I think that's what they've done to themselves. Mm-hmm. The quality is not there, and now the quantity is not there. So what have you got?
Anyway, so we'd like to hear what our listeners think about this issue too, as well as to see the comics that you're working on so we can critique them on the show. So for either your opinion or your comic, mail at deconstructingcomics.com. And the comics will read at least 30 pages of them and critique them on the show. So, any questions?
Yeah, actually I do.
Okay.
Before we end it, have we received any letters about
the movies? Not so far. Haven't seen anything. But that episode, well, it's been, I guess, a week since it came out. I haven't seen anything yet, no.
Okay.
No. So, yeah, what Marvel movies should I watch? That's another thing we want to hear from you. Okay, so until next time, this is Tim.
And also, I had another question. So, are you planning to visit any comic book shops when you're back in the States?
I've thought about it. I might see if I can get some comic shop people to talk to me about the state of the market.
Yeah. Okay. I'd really like to hear that, and looking forward to it.
Okay.
And Lele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.
Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Coombe at Toronto Comic Con interviews comics legend Denny O'Neil. See you next week.